welcome everyone. This virtual program, you're making history today. This is our first legitimate brown bag virtual program that more people are doing. And it's great to see all of you, even if you're not here. But I'm here at the museum, safe here with I've got my mask, so I'll move. Michael's over here 6 feet away. But thank you all for being here. Oh, here comes another person. Hold on. I got to keep watching that. We even have Jessica, our former curator, is here visiting from Nebraska from her new job. So we've got a great group of people, about 35 people signed up. So bear with us as we try to manage everybody and make this work. So you're all muted right now. And at the end, I will unmute you if you want to ask a question. So at the very bottom, there is a participants button, and you can click in that. And then you should see a raise your hand button in the participants list. So that's at the end, if you wouldn't mind waiting till the end, and then we'll try our best to get to each of you. I've got Marky helping me as well to check on that, because it's hard to watch all of you on the side here and keep up with who's got questions. So I'm going to introduce Michael Lambert here. Many of you know Michael. He's the preservation planner for the City of Geneva since January of 2013. He's an architect in private practice for more than 30 years. He's the founding chair of both the Will County Preservation Commission and the Plainfield Preservation Commission. He's a member of the Plainfield Historical Society, president since 2014. He's currently working on 2 books, one on vernacular limestone architecture of northern Will County, and another on early settlers of Plainfield, who they were, from where they came, and where they went. A few settled in Geneva. So we have lots of connections with Michael. We work with him a lot. As far as his interest in Frank Brownfield Gray, he was amazed at how little was known about his career, and his name surfaced in association with various projects in town and around Geneva. He thought it was time to find out a bit more about him and his architectural legacy. So 4 years later, here we are, and Michael's done a lot of research on this great architect. I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and we'll share my screen. I've got 2 more admissions here. Hold on, let's make sure these people get in okay. This is great. I love this. Everybody's getting more comfortable with all this technology. Okay. I'm going to turn it over now to Michael, and we'll share my screen. And let me get that going for him first here. All right. And here we go. Thank you, Michael. I'll stand by to help if you need anything.
Thank you, Terry. Hello, everybody. As you know, the discussion today is on Frank Brownfield Gray, architect of the Fox Valley. As Terry said, I'm Michael Lambert. I am the preservation planner for the City of Geneva. When Frank Brownfield Gray presented his college thesis in 1911, he made a declaration that he seemed to apply throughout his entire 47-year professional career as an architect. He said, in every design, one of our needs is to care for beauty, but each building must have beauty to suit its character. Frank Brownfield Gray had deep roots in the Fox Valley. His father, Ellis Asbury Gray, was the son of Charles B. and Polly Z. Garton Gray, who were early pioneers of the county. Some histories state that Charles Gray was the first man to put a plow in King County soil. Ellis was the youngest of the Charles Gray family of 5 sons and 3 daughters. Ellis married Rachel Seawright Brownfield in Fayette County, Pennsylvania on April 12, 1888, and the newlyweds immediately settled back in St. Charles, Illinois. 2 children were born to the couple, Frank B. Gray in 1889 and Elma Z. Gray in 1894. Ellis Gray worked in the Elgin National Watch Factory. He also was an attendant in the state hospital at Elgin. Additionally, he was at various times an auctioneer, a real estate agent, an insurance salesman, and an owner of a number of roller skating rinks in Kane County. Frank B. Gray attended the St. Charles schools and graduated from St. Charles High School in 1907.
You're okay. I think it's because someone's trying to come in or something here. Excuse us 1 second. Sorry. It's not letting you do anything. Hold on one second. Technical difficulties. And I can't seem to get out of it. Oh, here, let me try this. All right, we're going to keep going. Try this again. I think it's because, see, someone's coming in. Someone's coming in late. There's always an interruption, sorry, even in virtual life. Okay. I hope. I don't see anybody. Oh, that's good.
In the fall of 1907, Frank B. Gray entered the University of Illinois at Urbana, Illinois. There he enrolled in the College of Engineering to study architecture. Just 34 years earlier, in 1873,
That's why I have her out there checking. Sorry. Not sure why we're having issues. Give me one more second and maybe do that slide over again.
Okay.
We lost you when we did the admitting someone in. No more latecomers. Okay. Sorry. Go back to the one you're on.
Okay, in the fall of 1907, Frank B. Gray entered the University of Illinois at Urbana. There he enrolled in the College of Engineering to study architecture. Just 34 years earlier, in 1873, the second architecture program in the United States was established at the University of Illinois by Nathan Clifford Ricker, who himself had graduated in 1870 with an engineering degree. Ricker served as director until his retirement in 1910, when Frank Gray was a junior.
I don't know why. It's giving us issues.
We're making
Sorry.
history.
We're making, because two more people came back in. Oh, I got to figure out how to make that not work. People can't come in late. Apologies. Okay.
In addition to a rigorous course of study, Frank B. Gray managed a full extracurricular schedule at the university. He was treasurer of the Architects Club, served on the Architectural Annual and the Engineering Dance Committees, and was the Scarab Club business manager. The Scarab Club was founded at the University of Illinois in 1909 and became a national organization. In 1909, Frank B. Gray was a junior. The purpose of the organization was to foster good fellowship, to develop professional spirit, and stimulate friendly and personal cooperation. Invited members were selected from architects, engineers, and landscape architecture students and practitioners who had proven their aptitude. Scarab members commanded respect, and their honest opinions were taken at face value while lending prestige and dignity that would fuel the fire of enthusiasm burning in their hearts, inspiring themselves and the younger Scarabs as they pursued their chosen profession. Frank Gray wrote his college thesis in June of 1911. His thesis was a design for a city high school building, which the principles he outlined in the document would follow him throughout his career. Frank Gray's design principles, as stated in his thesis, said, panels, moldings, spandrels, and decorative features of a similar nature should be used to attract the eye of the average person, and especially the school child. And owing to the demand for light in buildings of this nature, design should avoid the use of heavy cornices, which would cause shadows to fall upon the windows and in the classrooms. Furthermore, F.B. Gray believed that brick and terracotta or brick and stone were the most practical materials for school buildings, and that corner rooms of a school building should receive light from only one side to prevent glare. The problem of treating a blank wall space then on those end classrooms was solved by using large panels made interesting by a pattern of projecting brick, which makes a pleasing shadow effect. And you'll see those design principles in some of his later schools.
I think we've learned that I should do it from a different computer than you're doing it.
That's all right.
Sorry. And yeah, because people are, I wish there was a way I could tell them they can't come in. We're learning. Bear with us. I think you're about to go. Yeah.
Frank Brown said in his thesis that in the school building, then, there is a moral need of aesthetics that the mind may be educated by as well as in the school. Again, another principle that he carried through his designs, not only in his schools, but in his other buildings. Frank B. Gray's first job after graduation from the University of Illinois was with the Chicago architectural firm of Joseph C. Llewellyn. Established in 1907, the firm specialized in school design and commercial buildings. Although Frank B. Gray only remained at his first job 1 year, he mingled with some of the most illustrious Chicago architects of the period, including the architects who designed the buildings where he worked and studied architectural details of those buildings of the era. This is where his first office was at in the First National Bank building, which was designed by the D.H. Burnham Company and built in 1903. Frank B. Gray left Joseph Llewellyn for the architectural office of William Otis and Edwin Clark. Their offices were located in the Montgomery Ward and Company Tower building, and it was established in 1908. This firm specialized in residences for wealthy clientele, churches, and libraries. Again, Frank B. Gray remained only 1 year, perhaps attempting to gain as much architectural experience as quickly as possible from the well-regarded Chicago architects whom he was mingling. Frank Gray's next position was in the office of W. Carbis Zimmerman, who had been named architect for the state of Illinois in 1905. In this role, Zimmerman designed public buildings across the state, including civic and judicial buildings at Chicago and Springfield, as well as numerous buildings at the University of Illinois campus in Urbana. The building which he worked, the Steinway building, was designed by Dwight H. Perkins, who was one of the original Prairie School architects in Illinois, in Chicago. By 1912, Frank B. Gray had moved to Chicago from St. Charles and was living at 5348 West Madison Street in Chicago. In 1914, Frank Gray established his own practice, but also was associated with architect Gilbert M. Turnbull. Trained as a carpenter and a builder, Turnbull lived in Elgin, Illinois originally, but established an architectural office in Chicago around 1890. Turnbull designed and built working class apartments, private homes, schools, commercial buildings, and civic buildings. It is possible that Turnbull knew the Ellis Gray family from their connections in Elgin. G.M. Turnbull is listed in the 1915 directory of tenants for the Otis building pictured here. However, Frank Gray is not. Therefore, it is likely that Frank B. Gray worked independently through Turnbull's office on the mezzanine level of the building. Turnbull likely mentored the young architect, and they assisted one another when projects demanded additional personnel. The two men apparently never formalized their partnership. Gilbert M. Turnbull was the architect for the Bowman Dairy Company, and when in his early 60s, completed drawings for the Bowman bottling plant at Crystal Lake, Illinois in 1915, as well as other Bowman dairy facilities in 1916. After setting out on his own, one of Frank B. Gray's first commissions was the field house at the new park being planned on Harrington's Island at Geneva, Illinois. The building included an open-air pavilion with a fireplace, as well as restrooms, activity rooms, and a kitchen area. It is unclear if Gray's design for an adjoining bandstand was ever completed. Between 1914 and 1915, Gilbert M. Turnbull and Frank B. Gray partnered on the design of a new building for the First Congregational Church at East Troy, Wisconsin. The fireproof construction of the neo-Gothic building included hollow clay tile walls with brick veneer, cement floors, and stucco gables. The design followed the Akron plan with a fellowship hall connected to the sanctuary by movable partitions. One of the things you'll notice through my program too is I'm referencing his advertisements that were published in various professional magazines and newspapers that advertise the building of new buildings. So the American Contractor and some of the others are some of those publications. In May 1917, Frank B. Gray collaborated with Aurora architect Benjamin Edwin Holden. The partnership designed the remodeling of the 1850s Greek Revival home of Charles B. Wells. The home had been built in 1854 by Richard Winship and then in 1857 enlarged for Charles B. Wells and his family. The 1917 project included the relocation of another Greek Revival home that was attached to the west side of the building. Ben Holden had collaborated with Gray's former employer, William A. Otis, on the design of the 1904 Aurora Public Library. Holden, who was 18 years older than Gray, had worked in Chicago until about 1908 when he established a practice at Aurora. As 1917 drew to a close, Frank B. Gray's professional life was at a crossroads. Gilbert M. Turnbull was slowing down, the United States entered World War I in April, and Aurora's leading architect, Fred Wurst, was killed tragically in December. Fred Wurst, the principal of Wurst and Shepherdson Architects, graduated from East Aurora High School in 1887 and joined Aurora architect John E. Minute in 1895 when the firm was located on LaSalle Street and renamed Minute and Wurst. Ralph Shepherdson, an 1897 graduate of the University of Illinois, joined the firm in 1902. In 1904, Shepherdson became a partner with Wurst, and the architectural firm was renamed Wurst and Shepherdson, remaining in business until 1917. Ralph Shepherdson was known for the design of hospitals, including Aurora City Hospital, which later became Copley Memorial Hospital. Mr. Shepherdson lectured extensively about modern sanitation and hospital design, and his work was featured in the September 1916 professional journal, The Modern Hospital. Tragically, Mr. Wurst died in December of 1917 following an accident involving his automobile colliding with a streetcar just north of Aurora. He died in the hospital that he designed. The circumstances surrounding Frank Gray's acceptance of a position in the leading architectural firm in Aurora is seemingly lost to history. In any case, Gray left Chicago in 1918 and established himself at Aurora. However, almost as soon as Frank B. Gray agreed to assume the leadership of the former Wurst and Shepherdson firm, he found himself back at Chicago reporting to municipal peer for military service. Entering the U.S. Navy, Frank B. Gray went through intensive technical training and earned the rank of machinist mate, second class. In that role, Gray was responsible for the operation, maintenance, and repair of ship propulsion machinery, auxiliary equipment, and outside machinery such as steering engine, hoisting machinery, food equipment, refrigeration and air conditioning equipment, windlasses, elevators, and laundry equipment, marine boilers, pumps, and forced draft blowers. He also was required to maintain meticulous records and reports. All of these skills would serve Frank Gray well into his architectural career after his military service. Although Frank B. Gray was the new owner of an established architectural firm, the day-to-day operations were left likely to Ralph Shepherdson. However, just 1 year after Frank B. Gray took charge of the Aurora firm, Ralph Shepherdson died in January 1919 while on a trip to Belhaven, North Carolina. The following month, Gray's mentor, Gilbert M. Turnbull, died. In spite of his military duties, Gray continued to build his architectural firm, even filling the gap resulting from Turnbull's death by securing a relationship with the Bowman Dairy Company. Frank B. Gray was honorably discharged from the U.S. Navy in June of 1919. Within 1 month, he married Dorothea Cohn on July 16, 1919. After the war and deaths of Fred Wurst and Ralph Shepherdson, Frank B. Gray inherited several architectural projects as well as the former Wurst and Shepherdson draftsmen, including left to right, Carl Collins, Ed Radloff, Frank Gray with the suit, and Nick Molitor. Gray maintained the former third floor office of Worson Shepherdson in the Coulter Block, which was known also as the First National Bank building in downtown Aurora because the bank was the primary ground floor tenant. The office building still stands and is located on Broadway Street, immediately north of Downer Place in downtown Aurora. Many of Frank B. Gray's first commissions were for small projects. However, Gray injected beauty into the details of even his simplest and least pretentious projects. One of the first commissions in Gray's office at Aurora was a new building for the Blackberry Masonic Lodge at Elburn, Illinois. The Masons had been renting a building, but the building caught on fire in 1918. By early 1919, the lodge had purchased the remains of the former meeting hall and were planning a new lodge building in place of the former meeting space. Frank B. Gray was commissioned to design the new brick building with limestone accents and subtle details of cut limestone and stacked brick within a slightly projected gable at the entrance portal. He also combined green glazed tile in the second floor spandrel panels and limestone gable elements, creating visual interest within the facade of an otherwise ordinary building. In 1919, Fred Herod commissioned Frank B. Gray to design a modern but elegant grocery store for his business in downtown Sandwich, Illinois. Simple elements and subtle detailing combined with accents of differing paint colors elevated the unassuming small building to a distinctive gem in the downtown. Herod opened the new store in 1920 and operated the grocery until 1929 when he sold to the Ungland brothers. During his first decade in business at Aurora, Frank B. Gray's architectural practice flourished. Gray secured commission after commission for new and remodeled factories, schools, residences, social and fraternal clubs, and commercial buildings, including the remodeling of several older buildings into a new style, such as the Brady Block pictured on the lower left. Following the death of Gilbert M. Turnbull, Frank H. Gray successfully pursued the Bowman Dairy Company, one of his most lucrative business connections for more than 2 decades. Founded by Johnston R. Bowman, the Bowman Dairy Company of Chicago emphasized quality and purchased its first milk pasteurizer in 1907, although the firm had been pasteurizing cream much earlier because butter made from pasteurized cream had a significantly better taste. By the first half of 1908, all of the firm's milk was being pasteurized. J.R. Bowman introduced many administrative changes that made the company innovative among its competition. The firm's centralized bottling plant in Chicago was superseded by several smaller plants located in the country, nearer the suppliers of raw milk. The first country plant was established in Elburn, Illinois in 1901. During the same year, the Bowman Dairy Company modernized its accounting system, which was an advance amongst other dairies. The Crystal Lake building shown here is the building designed by G.M. Turnbull with the assistance of Frank B. Gray in 1915. The Crystal Lake building is on the upper left. Around World War I, just as Frank B. Gray was beginning his career at Aurora, the Bowman Dairy Company entered the dry milk industry and built new plants to produce the powdered milk product. The dry milk industry required additional warehousing to store the product prior to shipping. President J.R. Bowman died in March 1920 and was succeeded by his brother, Robert A. Bowman, who reversed his brother's decision to disperse bottling facilities throughout the Chicago area. Expansion of the Bowman Dairy Company operations continued through the 1920s, with sales increasing at a steady rate. With increased demand for its milk products, the Bowman Dairy Company continued to build and expand its milk collection, production, and distribution facilities, most of which were designed by Frank B. Gray. Frank Gray and his staff of draftsmen were continually busy and enjoyed the benefits of the Bowman Dairy Company's steady expansion through the next decade. Although the majority of the Bowman Dairy Company's collection and processing facilities were located across northern Illinois, several facilities were built in southern Wisconsin, such as this facility at Clinton Junction, designed by Frank Gray. As the demand for powdered milk increased in the early 1920s, the Clinton Junction facility was developed as a cooperative partnership between the Bowman Dairy Company and the Dry Milk Company of New York. Throughout the 1920s, Frank B. Gray produced dozens of buildings for the Bowman Dairy Company. Gray and his staff also kept busy with modifications of previously built facilities as innovation demanded changes within the facilities for the Bowman Dairy. As the Bowman Dairy Company expanded its motorized fleet of delivery vehicles, the company built its own storage and repair facilities for its fleet of delivery trucks, also designed by Gray. However, with the onset of the Great Depression, Gray's lucrative business connection was contracting fewer projects. By 1931, when the effects of the Great Depression became acute within the milk industry, Bowman was one of Chicago's largest dairies and the leading milk home delivery service. The Depression placed a severe strain on the company as milk prices fell rapidly. Bowman was particularly hard hit because the demand for home delivery, which accounted for 85% of their business, declined as well. In 1935, R.A. Bowman died, and Dr. David B. Peck was promoted from purchasing agent and manager of construction projects to the Bowman Dairy Company's new president. Peck and Frank B. Gray had worked together for many years, so in spite of the belt-tightening measures throughout the late Depression, Frank B. Gray retained his ties to the Bowman Dairy Company, even as it explored new policies of product diversification and geographic decentralization by 1937. Due to his connections with the Bowman Dairy Company and several large commissions in the years immediately prior to October 1929, Frank B. Gray was able to maintain his architectural office through the Great Depression. For centuries, the White Plague, also known as tuberculosis or consumption, was considered an ailment of the poor. Wealthier people often escaped the embarrassment of the disease by retreating to health spas. As the Industrial Revolution brought more workers into crowded urban centers, the plague spread and no one was immune. Bacteriologist Robert Koch's germ theory in 1882 provided better insight into the disease and lent itself to explaining the spread of tuberculosis. Beginning around 1910, Kane County officials organized an anti-tuberculosis organization in response to state laws that required hospitals to provide beds equal to the number of tuberculosis-related deaths in each region. Eventually, the Kane County organization planned to build its own county sanatorium. Tuberculosis sanitariums organized patients into 3 distinct classes based on the progression of their disease: hospital, semi-ambulant, and ambulant. Upon entering the sanitarium, physicians prescribed round-the-clock bed rest to their patients in hospital wards. Semi-ambulant patients were permitted to leave their beds several times a day, and ambulant patients who were closest to being cured were assigned to open-air cottages or in larger complexes allowed to spend time on open-air porches. Designed by Frank Gray in 1919 and completed in 1920, the Kane County Tuberculosis Sanitarium, just north of downtown Aurora, was highly regarded and considered modern in every aspect of its architecture and patient care. The 57-bed facility provided highly regarded care under the direction of Dr. Imus P. Rice, a leading physician in the treatment of tuberculosis. 2 large open-air porches, one above the other, and constructed of reinforced concrete, line the south side of the Kane County Sanitarium. There, recovering patients could enjoy both fresh air and warm sunshine. The development and use of streptomycin in the treatment of tuberculosis during World War II brought an end to the White Plague and the sanitarium movement. In the decades following a medicinal cure, many of the sanitarium complexes were abandoned and fell into ruin. However, some were repurposed. Years later, as he approached retirement, Frank B. Gray identified the Kane County Tuberculosis Sanitarium among his most valued commissions, possibly because of the lives that were saved within the facility he designed. Platted in 1922, the Riddle Highlands subdivision of Aurora, Illinois is notable for its fine collection of period revival style homes, including English cottage, American foursquare, Tudor style, and others. Many of the modest homes are built of brick or locally quarried limestone. At the request of developer Frank H. Riddle, each entry into the neighborhood was marked with brick piers with a limestone medallion inscribed with Riddle Highlands and a prairie-style influenced terracotta sphere. The piers were designed in 1922 by Frank B. Gray, and the decorative spheres were produced by the American Terracotta and Ceramic Company. Founded in 1873, the Evangelical Theological Seminary was located adjacent to Northwestern College in Naperville. Northwestern College was later renamed North Central College and still exists today. However, the college and the seminary were never affiliated. After 50 years without an official president's home, the seminary trustees commissioned Frank B. Gray of Aurora, Illinois, to design an official residence that reflected the traditional conservative values of the religious institution. The two-story brick home was designed in the colonial revival style and was completed in November 1923. President Gustav B. Kimmel and his family were the first and only family associated with the seminary to reside in the home. The seminary moved from Naperville by the fall of 1931 due to the effects of the Depression and reduced enrollment. Standing at the corner of School and Brainerd Streets in downtown Naperville, the president's home is adjacent to the campus of North Central College. In 1923, as the design for this home was being finalized, Frank and Dorothea Gray welcomed their first child, a daughter, Mary Louise. In this freestyle Tudor-style home, Frank B. Gray loosely interpreted the architecture of the rural English countryside as he envisioned it. However, we have no record to suggest that Gray ever visited England throughout his career. Designed within the first third of his architectural career, the Jones House exhibits Gray's attention to detail and visual balance of a variety of architectural details that include a colonial revival entry porch with fluted Doric columns, a leaded glass fan light above the entry door, intricate brickwork, slate-covered undulating roof, and an eyebrow dormer, making the entire composition reminiscent of an English country cottage. The home is, in 2020, located in Aurora's West Downer Place Historic District. In 1923, Frank Brownfield Gray was selected as the architect for a new grade school at Geneva. The new school was built on land bounded by Campbell, 6th, Franklin, and 7th Street. Completed in 1925, the brick and limestone facade fronted 6th Street and includes many of the ideals that Frank Brownfield Gray originally proposed in his 1911 college thesis. Although it was designed more than a decade after that thesis, the 6th Street School embodied many of those ideas he identified as important elements of a modern school building, including brick with limestone trim, large windows for light, and decorative treatment of large wall surfaces at the exterior. He also believed that classrooms should be centralized around a wide primary hallway and have durable floor and wall materials, as well as the classroom should be well lit and well ventilated with as much built-in cabinetry and storage as possible, and the building should be fire resistive. Gray's original architectural drawings for the school are recovered and now are part of the Geneva History Museum archives. Many of these architectural details and finishes would be incorporated into later designs for other schools designed by Frank B. Gray and his associates. As the new 6th Street School building rose out of the ground in 1924, Frank and Dorothea Gray welcomed their second child, another daughter, Dorothy Ann. Around 1925, Frank B. Gray abandoned the Warren Coulter Block office space he had inherited in 1918. He moved his office to Motor Row, a section of LaSalle Street in downtown Aurora, Illinois, devoted to the sale and service of automobiles. Early automobile owners tended towards modern thinking and often had greater expendable incomes. Although no documents have been discovered to verify the hypothesis, it is probable that the building where his office was moved to may have been designed by Frank Gray himself. He was one of the leading architects in Aurora as Motor Row evolved. The LaSalle Street building incorporates brick and decorative terracotta and limestone, as well as projected piers of the parapet. Although many architects who were influenced by the Prairie School used similar details, these elements appear frequently in the designs known to have been produced by Gray's office. This image of Frank B. Gray at his desk is presumed to have been photographed from the LaSalle Street architectural office shortly after he moved in. When the ambitious plan was announced for a new bank building in downtown Aurora, the new building was proposed to be 13 stories tall and would be the tallest building in Illinois outside of Chicago. As the design was refined between architect and client, the building was reduced to 9 stories, which made the tallest building in Aurora. Reflecting the Beaux-Arts classicism, the facades were clad with honed limestone adorned with restrained ornament. The Broadway Street facade featured a 2.5-story entry arch leading to a grand banking hall at the center of the building. Commercial tenants and ancillary banking functions were anticipated for the first 2 floors, while floors 4 through 9 were envisioned for professional offices. A small 10th floor penthouse housed mechanical equipment and provided access to the roof. When completed in 1927, the primary first floor tenant of the Aurora National Bank building was the Hartswago Drug Company. Apparently, the limestone balustrade around the roofline was never installed, although it exists in the artist renderings of the design that was used in the bank's advertisements for many years. Frank B. Gray's original exterior design of the Aurora National Bank was altered soon after the end of World War II. The major exterior change was the demolition of the grand arched entrance portal from Broadway Street. The carved stone arch was dismantled and many pieces were disposed of in the Fox River. Years later, some of the discarded carved stones were salvaged and now are on display at the Aurora Historical Society. As depicted in the metal coin bank in the center, the archway was replaced with a bas-relief sculpture of Liberty, and the great banking hall was converted to office space. Beginning in 1972, the exterior was further remodeled with metal fascia panels and aluminum windows. However, the architectural carvings, inscriptions, and cornice remained intact above the second floor. The Aurora National Bank building was the most elaborate of any commissions completed by Frank B. Gray in his office to that time. Both of the significant alterations of the Aurora National Bank occurred within Frank Gray's lifetime. However, no record of his thoughts and opinions about the later remodelings exist. Built as a carriage barn for John B. Atwater around 1870, although some claim it may have been built as early as 1856 for Dr. Edwin Judson, the building had been converted to the residence of Mr. and Mrs. J.C. Reddington during the first decades of the 20th century in Geneva. At that time, several barns had been converted to homes and even a church within the city of Geneva. In 1927, the owner of the former Atwater property, Sid L. Castle, sold the carriage barn turned house to Stuart Watson of Aurora in February 1927. In January of 1927, Mr. Watson announced his plans and prepared to let construction contracts as soon as the property closed. Watson engaged building movers of West Chicago to relocate the former carriage house turned residence to a lot at the corner of Easton and Forest Avenues. In mid-April 1927, Fred Hillquist of Geneva excavated the basement at the new site. The carriage barn turned house was moved beginning April 26, 1927. In the fall of 1926, Mr. Watson had commissioned Frank Gray to redesign and enlarge the home in the colonial revival style. The remodeling work was completed in late September of 1927, and the Watson family moved from Aurora to Geneva in the first week of October of that year. The records, drawings, and molds of the American Terracotta and Ceramic Company have been cataloged and published by the Association for Preservation Technology. The publication includes this partial list of projects designed by Frank B. Gray and that utilize their fired clay products. This partial list also identifies previously unknown projects completed by Frank B. Gray, such as the Stout Brothers Pharmacy building in downtown Aurora, as well as projects for the Bowman Dairy Company and the Riddle Highlands entry piers, and even the chimney pots for the architect's own home in Geneva, and the architectural details of the St. Charles Grade School building. In 1927, Charles McCornack engaged architect Frank B. Gray to design a premier gas distribution and auto service station that opened in December of 1928 and eventually became corporate headquarters. The building operated as a gas station until 1990 and was adapted in 2001 for use as the St. Charles History Museum. Based on the design of the St. Charles Station and historic newspaper accounts, it is probable that Frank B. Gray also designed gas stations in Geneva at State and Fifth Streets and at State and First Streets. Following a 1927 fire that destroyed the East Side School in St. Charles, Frank B. Gray, the local boy who had attained success, secured the commission for the design of a new grade school. In many ways, the floor plan, finishes, and details of the new school followed the basic school design principles that Frank Gray had laid out in his 1911 college thesis and employed in other school designs throughout his career. Many of the architectural details proposed for the new school were standard features in other Frank Gray designed schools. However, as the St. Charles design process unfolded, Frank Gray was determined to incorporate all of the principles of education and beauty that he had laid out in 1911 in the new elementary school for his hometown. Frank Gray used terracotta extensively throughout the exterior and interior of the new elementary school, christened Abraham Lincoln School. The cornerstone was made of terracotta, and peach-toned mottled terracotta framed windows and embellished the stairway pavilions. Terracotta also capped the roof line at the parapet. Terracotta medallions and moldings were integrated into the building facade, and the school's nameplate was cast in terracotta. Two special characters molded in terracotta hover above the north and south entrances. One doorway features a gnome, the scribe, while the other doorway features another gnome, the reader. As in no other of his school designs, Frank B. Gray realized at Abraham Lincoln School the principles he identified in his 1911 thesis. The composition of a school building should inspire the child's mind while attracting the eye of the average person, and especially the school child. In fact, many of the details of Abraham Lincoln School can be found in his 1911 thesis. When the Abraham Lincoln School celebrates 90th birthday in 2018, present and former students of the school recalled how both the teachers and the building inspired and encouraged their imaginations. Abraham Lincoln School incorporated many familiar elements found in Frank B. Gray designed schools. Corridor walls are made with glazed brick, while floors are made of concrete with polished terrazzo. Built-in storage cabinets line the walls of many classrooms, and pivoting doors allow access to the cloak closets within the classrooms. The kindergarten room of Abraham Lincoln School incorporated an expansive bay window where children could gather for story time. At the opposite end of the space is a large fireplace that was used for many years, but now is obscured by a work table. Looking beyond the clutter, the fireplace is adorned with fanciful Batchelder Wilson tiles that depict places of a child's imagination, such as a tree along a river running through the hills or a magical village set high on a mountainside. Like the school building exterior, the kindergarten room inspires the child's mind. Complementing the bay window and fireplace is a feature unique to Abraham Lincoln School's kindergarten room. It has a fully functioning fish pond. Aside from the inspiration provided by water and live fish, the entire basin is decorated with more handmade Batchelder Wilson tiles that create a visual delight at the eye level of a child. Among the handcrafted tiles produced during the arts and crafts period, the carved relief tiles of Ernest Batchelder are among the most prized. Each handcrafted tile is made from earthen materials local to the artist's studio. The fanciful tiles are a clear embodiment of the arts and crafts philosophy. Batchelder's principles of ordered design were harmony, balance, and rhythm. His own studio and factory was well organized based on these principles. Ernest Batchelder began producing the colorful and fanciful tiles in 1912 at his studio in Pasadena, California. In 1920, Batchelder partnered with Lucianne Wilson, and the tiles were crafted under the name Batchelder Wilson. At the height of demand in the early 1920s, Bachelder had 175 artisans working for him in his Los Angeles studio. By 1925, the partners were warehousing tile in New York City to manage demand and ease distribution throughout the United States. Bachelder excelled at marketing and published catalogs of the tiles and advertised in popular magazines of the era. Despite the popularity of the tile, the Great Depression put Bachelder out of business in 1932. Frank B. Gray's kindergarten room at Abraham Lincoln School in St. Charles fully embodied his thesis assertion that a school should inspire the child's mind. Between 1921 and 1929, Frank B. Gray and his family lived in this well-kept brick 7-room American four-square house at the corner of 3rd Street and Walnut Avenue in downtown St. Charles. The property included a detached heated garage. Beginning in 1928, Frank and Dorothea Gray began construction of a new home at Geneva, Illinois. Frank B. Gray's father, Ellis, remained active at age 75 and was involved with real estate sales, including the sale of his son's home. When in his 60s, Ellis Gray had worked as an auctioneer after careers at the watch factory, the state hospital, and manager of several roller rinks in the Elgin area. In September 1925, Frank B. and Dorothea Gray purchased land from Charles Edward Appler, who had recently purchased a large tract of land along the Lincoln Way, now Batavia Avenue, south of Geneva. Designed in the Tudor style, the grand house combined brick, stone, and half-timbered stucco and slate roofing that evoked the romantic architecture of the English countryside as envisioned by Frank B. Gray. The house incorporated the most modern of appliances and an attached double bay automobile garage. The house rivaled the stately and elaborate homes that for 2 decades had been built in the neighborhood by many of Geneva's most affluent residents. With increasing economic hardship and record unemployment during the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt established the Works Progress Administration in 1935. The goal of this New Deal employment incentive was to ensure that at least one member of each American household was gainfully employed and earning a wage. Under various programs, professionals and laborers built traditional infrastructure such as roads, schools, libraries, courthouses, hospitals, sidewalks, waterworks, and post offices. However, those workers also built museums, swimming pools, parks, community centers, playgrounds, markets, fairgrounds, and tennis courts, along with other type of recreational facilities. Architects were some of the professionals who benefited the most from the WPA program. Under the WPA, a gymnasium and kindergarten addition was added to the rear and south side of Geneva's existing 6th Street grade school in 1938. Architect Frank B. Gray welcomed the WPA-funded project, whose design was funded in late 1936. As the school's original architect, Frank B. Gray realized his original decades-old vision for the school. Reportedly, the gymnasium was designed for the addition of an auditorium above, which would have mirrored Gray's school design principles laid out in his 1911 college thesis. Through the various WPA programs, 40,000 new and 85,000 improved buildings were completed, including 5,900 new schools and 9,300 new auditoriums, gyms, and recreational buildings. The WPA was disbanded in 1943 when the United States experienced a shortage of labor at the onset of World War II. Although former students, local historians, and neighbors pleaded for the historic building to be repurposed, the 6th Street School building was demolished in 2015. The overcrowded Geneva Public Library also benefited from the WPA incentives. Combined with tax monies, funding was available for architectural design and construction of a modest addition to the east side of the 1908 library. Local architect Frank B. Gray designed the single-story addition, which included a basement. The library addition was completed by general contractor August Wilson in November of 1938. The exterior was of native limestone that matched the stone from the original building. The majority of the addition was a child's room on the main floor, which measured 25 by 65. The main room of the addition incorporated a child-friendly element favored by architect Gray, a large bay window that invited children to gather together. A meeting room, storeroom, and kitchen facilities were also installed in the basement. However, due to the limited funds for the project, the basement meeting room was left partially unfinished. The Gray design addition was replaced when the library was expanded a half century later to the east. As the Great Depression dragged on through the 1930s, many architects lost their jobs as architectural commissions evaporated and architectural offices closed. Due to his lucrative commissions throughout the 1920s, his business management skills, and his ongoing relationship with the Bowman Dairy Company, Frank B. Gray maintained his office at Aurora. However, to retain employees, Gray took on whatever jobs he could secure, including the drawing of the East Aurora Cemetery plat by his longtime draftsman, Edward H. Radloff. Unwavering in his optimism during the Great Depression, Frank B. Gray served as president of the Aurora Chamber of Commerce between 1934 and 1935, following a decade of service to the Aurora Chamber of Commerce Board and a term on the Illinois State Chamber of Commerce Board. As the Depression dragged on, draftsman Ed Radloff left Gray's office. However, Frank B. Gray retained his primary associate, Nick Molitor, through the following years. However, in 1939, the office only had enough projects to keep Molitor working 43 of the 52 weeks of that year. As the United States entered World War II, the American economy had begun to improve. In early 1942, Frank B. Gray hired a young architect, William J. Laz. However, William Laz was called to service in the Army the following year. In 1943, after 25 years in business in Aurora, Frank B. Gray closed his office and laid off his longtime associate, Nick Molitor. Frank B. Gray moved the office to his Geneva home and continued his architectural practice on his own. But Frank B. Gray, the proud veteran, also answered the call of his country and took a position with the United States War Production Board. When World War II ended in November 1945, Frank B. Gray contemplated the reestablishment of an Aurora office. However, in 1946, Gray continued his practice in his own home on Batavia Avenue and rehired William Laz when he was discharged from the Army. William Laz became an associate in the architectural firm, which in 1949 changed its name to Gray and Laz Architects. Designed by Frank B. Gray, then based in Geneva, the Dunham House project was designed with William J. Laz as an associate and a young college student, Robert Mall, who was earning a degree in engineering. The Dunham House demonstrates Gray's transition from the classical architecture of his early career to the sleek, low-slung lines of the mid-century modern ranch home. The Dunham House today is included within the Downer Place West Historic District at Aurora. In 1950, Robert Mall, the engineering student who had worked on the Dunham House, joined Frank B. Gray's architectural firm that continued to work from the Gray home on Batavia Avenue. In 1953, when Gray was 64 years old, the firm operated as Gray, Laz, and Mall Architects and Engineers. When Frank Brownfield Gray announced his retirement in 1958, William Joseph Laz and Robert Franklin Mall continued their partnership until the 1960 death of William Laz. Mall continued his own engineering career, retiring shortly before his death in 1998. However, in the years immediately preceding his retirement, Frank B. Gray enjoyed one more outstanding commission. Late in 1951, Colonel Edward J. Baker, a St. Charles millionaire philanthropist, announced his plans to build a new facility for the First United Methodist Church of St. Charles. The new building was intended as a memorial to Baker's parents and founding members of the congregation, Edward and Martha Baker. In early 1952, Colonel Baker announced that he had entrusted his vision to a colleague in many civic ventures, architect Frank B. Gray. Architectural designs for an elaborate edifice were soon progressing. On December 19, 1952, although construction was already underway, Colonel Edward J. Baker ceremonially turned over the first shovel of dirt. Frank Underwood, the oldest member of the congregation, turned over a second shovel of dirt. Frank B. Gray and Robert Mall also participated in the groundbreaking ceremony. The cornerstone was set in the spring of 1953. However, a cornerstone ceremony was held at 2 p.m. on July 26, 1953, with Colonel Baker and Frank B. Gray in attendance. On Friday, February 26, 1954, when the final stone at the highest point of the church was set in place, an American flag and a Methodist church flag were unfurled above the tower, keeping with an old topping out custom of builders who fly a flag upon the closing in or completion of a building exterior. The modern Gothic building incorporated Lannon stone at the exterior and Indiana limestone with oak trim and furnishings at the interior. The LaSalle Construction Company of Chicago built the impressive facility, which cost in excess of $1.25 million and was equipped with the most modern amenities available at the time. On September 19, 1954, the completed building, the Baker Memorial Church, was formally dedicated. At the ceremony, architect Frank B. Gray, representing Gray, Latson Mall Architects and Engineers, presented the building keys to Colonel Baker. By 1956, Frank B. Gray, at age 67, was contemplating retirement. In addition to his architectural career and service to the Aurora Chamber of Commerce, Frank B. Gray had been a Mason since 1912, was a charter member and past president of the local Kiwanis Club, past lieutenant governor of Illinois for the Iowa district of Kiwanis International, and was a member of the local Salvation Army Board. Additionally, Frank B. Gray served on the Geneva High School Board for 15 years. In 1958, Frank B. Gray and his wife Dorothea sold their Batavia Avenue home and moved to Los Gatos, California, a community just outside of San Jose, where his daughter Dorothy was living with her husband and 2 children. Frank B. Gray, along with his wife and daughters, is buried in the Gray family plot at Union Cemetery in St. Charles. Upon Frank B. Gray's death in 1976 at the age of 87, friends and colleagues remembered him as a talented and hardworking architect and an optimistic civic leader. However, his family, particularly his grandchildren, grandniece, and grandnephew, knew Frank B. Gray as Bopper and his wife Dorothy as Dee Dee. In fact, even the members of the Los Gatos chapter of the Kiwanis called him Bopper. Frank B. Gray is remembered by his family as a modest man who rarely spoke of his prolific architectural career, but in retirement loved to tell entertaining stories, go fishing, and tend to his vegetable garden. Frank B. Gray had a dry sense of humor and was able to laugh at himself and often. He relaxed in his later years. When his daughter Mary Louise moved her family from Omaha, Nebraska to Los Gatos, California, Frank B. Gray asked his grandnephew, "Have you been to the beach yet?" In short order, the pair had climbed into Frank's big old Buick and drove to Santa Cruz, where they spent an hour running through the dodging waves along the beach. In his old age, Frank B. Gray continued to engage and inspire the wonder in children, just as he had hoped to do with his school designs from years before. Frank Brownfield Gray truly was the architect of the Fox Valley, and throughout his long architectural career, his buildings embraced the simple guiding principle he first advanced in 1911. In every design, one of our needs is to care for beauty, but each building must have beauty to suit its character. The legacy of Frank B. Gray, or Bopper, lies in the hearts of those who knew him best, family, friends, and colleagues. For the rest of us, Frank B. Gray's architectural legacy surrounds us in the Fox Valley and beyond if we'll just take a look. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. That was excellent. I learned a lot. I did not know a lot about Frank, so I appreciate that. Are there any questions? I'll try to figure out how to do this. Anyone want to raise their hand? I'll check and see if there's a hand. Oh, she literally raises her hand. All right, let me find you here. Oh, there you are. Here on this panel. All right, Liz, I've got you unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me, Terry?
Yes.
The question is about the shelter in Island Park, which was that 1914?
Yes.
Okay. And some of us who grew up in Geneva, like Gloria Ann, et cetera, we're going to remember the pool that was there too, the tile pool that was next to that shelter. And it was closed during the polio epidemic and then filled in. Michael, is that protected? Remind me if that's a landmark. I believe it's a designated landmark, local landmark.
It is not designated individually, but is part of the local historic district. The district extends to the east side of Harrington's Island.
Oh, to the east side. Okay. All right. That's a relief. Thank you. It's a gem.
Mhm.
And then it's owned now by the Park District. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
So they're responsible for maintenance,
Yes,
upkeep. Thank you. And thank you for this wonderful presentation.
you're welcome.
Any other questions?
I've got one. If you can
Okay.
hear me.
And who's this? I'm
Michael,
sorry.
I'm sorry, this is
Gordon.
Gordon.
Hi, Gordon.
Hi. Mike, really enjoyed it, Michael. It was really good. I wish you would have put which buildings are destroyed and which ones still exist. I'm kind of guessing the black and white pictures are demolished and the color pictures still exist. Is that?
No, almost all of the buildings in the lecture exist except for 6th Street School. Several of the Bowman Dairy buildings are in pretty tough shape, but there's about 30, I think it's about 30 Bowman Dairy buildings that survive in some way, shape, or form.
Interesting. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to move on to Colin's got his hand up, and I'm going to unmute you, Colin. Let's see.
Both of us have questions. I'll let Gloria go first.
Well, I was, my memory, of course, of 6th Street School, and I have never been into the Lincoln School, but 6th Street, we had the fireplace in our kindergarten room. We had a beautiful bay window there. I mean, it was just so, you know, he repeated, he kept doing that thing. Well, I don't recall a fish pond, but it was a lovely, lovely room. That's what my memory, and I felt so bad that they just closed up the fireplace in the last years. Well, don't get me started on the fact that it's gone.
I know.
My question is, and Michael, first of all, wonderful presentation,
Always.
very interesting. And I don't mean to load more work on you, which means I'm going to ask you to do something more. A brief list of the existing buildings in the Tri-Cities, Aurora, anything in Elgin. We're all sitting around here with nothing to do, and taking a tour would be awfully nice. Addresses and a brief description of his works that we could go around and look at them now that we've seen them and have some reference would really be nice if you could do that someday.
In your spare time, Michael.
Yeah, in your spare time.
In my spare time, I'll work on that. A lot of the buildings that are mentioned in the different advertisements are not identified by address, so I'm still trying to search them out. We can put together a list of the ones we know.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be comprehensive, just those that are around that you think might be of general interest to drive by and look at.
I can work on that. I won't give you a date that I'll have it ready for you, but I'll get it done as quickly as I can.
You can also rewatch this program and make a list if you wanted to, Colin. It's recorded and I'll give you a link.
Yes, I can do that. That would be good. I
Yeah.
just have to get to the recording.
Sure, I'll send you a link. Anyone else have their hand up, or I'm going through to make sure? Thank you for dealing with our technical difficulties. I did learn that next time we do this, I'll have the presenter on a different computer than mine, so I can handle the activity and they can just concentrate on the presentation. But we're learning all the time, so thank you for bearing with us. Oh, Liz has her hand up again. Hold on, let me get to you to unmute you. All right, Liz, I got you unmuted.
Okay. Question about the Jones house in Aurora. That's the one that you said was like an English cottage or bungalow, an English country bungalow. One building just struck me as such an anomaly among all the others. It just, the roof line and the roof itself, it really reminded, I'm wondering if he was influenced by Harold Zook, who built not only the St. Charles Municipal Building, designed it, but cottages throughout the western suburbs. I mean, homes that had that look. Did you have any feeling at all? Or is it just that was the style that was popular then?
Well, I looked into actually a connection with Harold Zook because they overlapped their careers a little bit. I didn't find any real connection, but I do find it interesting that the Jones house and his own house are two of the few of his buildings designed in the Tudor Revival style. So he must have really at least had a fascination with the English countryside.
Mhm.
But those were the only two I found that were in the English style, cottage style.
Anyone else? I'll go through and just make sure no one's trying to wave at me, literally. I hope you're all doing well. We sure miss seeing you, but glad that we have this technology to connect. We're going to continue reaching out to all of you. I hope you have, some of you are journaling. I am journaling about this. And if you are, even if it's just a little note about the changes in the world and how we're all feeling and coping, we have started a file here at the museum for journals. And we also have fun coloring pages. We have the Kane County Courthouse, and then I'll release the St. Mark's Church later today. So thanks to Marky, is helping put some fun mosaics behind some of our most historic buildings. And we put the colored pictures in the window of the museum, so when you go on your walk, you can come by and take a look. And also we have in this same room, artist Dennis Grumlick is painting the mural for the backdrop of our beautiful creche. He'll be painting on Wednesdays and Saturdays from 2:30 to 4:30. And you can really see right through the window here in the front, you can watch him. And he likes me to put opera music on. So you'll listen to the music outside as well as what he's listening to inside. And you can watch our beautiful artistic mural develop. We hope to unveil it at our November Brown Bag, where he will explain his process and thoughts. And then we will unveil the beautiful mural in the creche itself so you can be the first to see it. If we have to do it virtually, we'll do it virtually, but we'll do it any way we can. So thanks to all of you. I will, oh, Jessica, great presentation, Michael. See, yay, that's nice.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. So fun to see everyone. She says, I miss Geneva. So we miss you too. And so glad you could join us today. Everyone stay safe, stay well, and stay connected with us, please. Watch for my emails. I try to do at least one a week. Sometimes I do 2 a week. I don't want to do too many and overburden you. But just want to keep connecting with all of you and share our stories. Stay safe. Thank you for coming today, and we'll see you soon.